We begin chapter 14 by considering what is an acid and what is a base, and provide some examples. Acids have the following properties. They have a sour taste, like lemon. They dissolve many metals, and they actually turn blue litmus paper red. This is what is pictured. Blue litmus touched with acid turns red or pink. A common saying to help us remember blue to red, as said, acid. Blue, red, and said rhyme, and so acid sounds like acid. Blue to red, as said. Some examples of acids are hydrochloric acid. It's found in most chemistry laboratories. It's used to clean metals and to prepare and process foods. Hydrochloric is the main component of stomach acid. Very dilute hydrochloric acid helps break down the food, and it kills harmful bacteria. The sour taste associated with indigestion is caused by the stomach's hydrochloric acid refluxing up the esophagus. Other examples are sulfuric and nitric acid. Sulfuric acid is a ternary acid containing hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur, and nitric acid is also a ternary acid. Sulfuric acid is the most widely produced chemical in the United States. For instance, it exceeds 36 million tons. Sulfuric acid and nitric acid are commonly used in the laboratory. They are also used in the manufacture of fertilizers, explosive dyes, and glue. And sulfuric acid is the acid found in most automobile batteries. Other examples is acetic acid. Acetic acid forms in improperly stored wines. The word vinegar originates from the French vinaigre, which means sour wine. Acetic acid is an example of a carboxylic acid, an acid containing the group COOH. Here's the carboxyl group. So that's why it's known as carboxylic acid. Note that acetic acid, its structure is like this, showing the carboxyl, and here's the acid hydrogen, but it's also written as hydrogen, the acid hydrogen, and then the acetate anion, C2H3O2. Bases. Well, bases have the following properties. They're bitter in taste. They have a slippery feel. And it turns red litmus to blue. We can help remember that blue begins with the same letter as base. Here's an example. Litmus paper turned blue when dipped in base. Some examples of base are sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, sodium bicarbonate. Both sodium hydroxide and potassium hydroxide are found in most chemistry labs, and they're used in processing petroleum, cotton, and in soap and the plastic manufacturing. Sodium hydroxide is the active ingredient in such products as Drano that works to unclog drains. Sodium bicarbonate can be found in most homes as baking soda. It's the active ingredient in many antacids. So when taken as an antacid, sodium bicarbonate neutralizes stomach acid, relieving heartburn and sour stomach. Let's look at a definition, the Arrhenius Definition of Acid. It says an acid produces hydrogen ions in aqueous solution. Hydrochloric acid, or hydrogen chloride, the gas, is a covalent compound, doesn't contain ions. Yet when it dissolves in water, you get the hydrogen ions and the chloride ions. So the presence of hydrogen ions in solution makes hydrochloric acid. The hydrogen ion is highly reactive, and in a water solution it reacts with water to form this ion, which is known as a hydronium ion. In water, they're always associated. Chemists often use hydrogen ion aqueous or hydronium ion aqueous interchangeably to refer to a hydrogen ion in solution. And the hydrogen ion is also called a proton, because you notice if you remove the single electron from the hydrogen atom, you are left with just the nucleus, which is a proton. In molecular form, you will find an acid. We often write the ionizable hydrogen first. For example, formic acid. Here's the ionizing hydrogen. This other hydrogen is not an acid hydrogen, non-ionizable. The structural formula of formic acid is shown here. This is not an acid hydrogen. However, the one that's attached to oxygen in the carboxyl group is the acid hydrogen in formic acid. The Arrhenius definition of base is a base produces hydroxide ions in aqueous solution. Sodium hydroxide is an ionic compound, so when it's dissolved in water, we get sodium ions and hydroxide ions. Molecular compounds containing an OH group, such as ethanol, do not dissociate in solution, and so they don't act as bases. Let's look at another more precise definition. One is called the Brønsted-Lowry definition of acid bases. The Brønsted-Lowry definition of acid is a proton donor. Base is a proton acceptor. But remember, the proton is only a hydrogen ion. These people working in Denmark developed the concept of proton transfer in acid-base behavior independently and simultaneously. Therefore, this is the Brønsted-Lowry concept. According to this definition, hydrogen is a Brønsted-Lowry acid because in solution it donates a proton. Let's see how that is done. Here's hydrochloric acid, and in water, so this proton gets transferred over here to this hydrogen, and this becomes a hydronium ion, leaving the chloride ion by itself. This is a complete proton transfer for hydrochloric acid. This definition more clearly accounts for what happens to the hydrogen ion from an acid. It associates with water to form hydronium ions. The Brønsted-Lowry works well for bases such as ammonia. Ammonia is a base, but we don't see any hydroxide. But in ammonia, it can accept a proton. That makes it a base. Here we see ammonia, and here's water. Water donates a proton. They get an ammonium ion and a hydroxide ion. So as a review, in the Brønsted-Lowry definition, acids, proton donors, and bases, proton acceptors. These things always occur together. In the reaction between hydrochloric acid and water, we can see in this reaction that HCl is a proton donor. It gives up its proton, becoming the chloride anion, and water is the proton acceptor. It accepts the proton and becomes a hydronium ion. So in the reaction between ammonia and water, we again see the same thing. Ammonia is the base because it accepts a proton, and water is an acid because it donates a proton. What we see is a different role for water. Water is both an acid and a base. Water is amphoteric. It can act either as an acid or base. It either can donate a proton or accept a proton. Even in pure water, acid acts as an acid base within itself, called self-ionization. This water molecule acts like an acid. This one acts like a base, accepting it. And when this, then we end up with the base accepting the proton, becoming a hydronium ion, and the acid donated proton becoming the hydroxide ion. This conjugate pair is a concept that's easy to think about. If you take any base and you add a proton, make it a proton acceptor, then you get the conjugate acid. If you take any acid and remove a hydrogen, then you get the conjugate base. So important, in looking for the conjugate acid, put on a proton. If you're looking for the conjugate base, take off a proton. In a chemical reaction, how to identify bases and their conjugates. Well, here you see what happened to NH3. It became NH4, which means it accepted the proton, and so therefore it was a base. And so this is one conjugate pair, the base and its conjugate acid. And water, what happened? It donated a proton. So here's the second pair, acid, water, and its conjugate base. A base accepts a proton and becomes its conjugate acid. Acid donates a proton, becomes the conjugate base. What substances then are acids and bases, and the concept of why they're acids and bases is the important topic of this short video. And so we see many common household acids and bases, and we see in fact here a special acid storage for the acids in the chemistry lab.